now going to move on to the session that we would normally open the proceedings at these National Equine Forums, and I'm delighted that we've got Roly Owers who's going to chair this session. Roly, over to you.
Tim, thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to the equine sector or industry in a changing world. 33rd National Equine Forum, the 9th year we've run this particular session, and I'm delighted to say out of those 9 years we've had the Defra Minister with us, and it's brilliant that after last year's gap that the Minister is with us today. So Baroness Hayman of Ullock, who is the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Defra, responsible for Minister of Biosecurity, Borders and Animal Welfare. She's going to give us a talk on the government's view on the equine sector. The Minister is a very keen chorister, and I was amazed by the breadth of a number of things she has to get involved with. When I was reading Hansard's the other day to see a debate around the reintroduction of beaver into England, and the Minister was listening to the propensities of beavers to build dams in the Czech Republic, which I was fascinated by, but I was more fascinated by, but she told the Chamber that she is an avid listener of the Archers. And the Archers obviously dealt with equine issues like obesity and the fireworks. So who better to speak to us today than the Minister?
Thank you, Roly, for a very interesting introduction. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to speak to you today, and also thanks to Roly for the introduction, and actually being such a pleasure to work with over the years, because I may well be the Minister now, but I've been the Shadow Minister for some time, and we also work together on the steering committee with the British Horse Racing Authority about the use of the whip in horse racing. So we've worked together very closely in the past, and you're very fortunate to have him with you as a spokesperson. But as he said, I'm going to provide the kind of the Defra view on some of the department's pretty wide equine portfolio. First of all, I'm sure you would all join me in expressing my heartfelt congratulations to Team GB for their successes at last year's Paris Olympic and Paralympic Games. To see our equestrian partnerships win an impressive haul of 12 medals, including 2 gold, across all 3 disciplines, was absolutely fantastic. And I see that Helen Nichols is going to be presenting a review of the Games later on in the programme. And this performance really does show the strength of talent in equestrian sport in Great Britain. And this extends beyond our riders and our horses to everybody, everyone involved in working hard in the support behind the scenes. I'm talking about grooms, coaches, vets, farriers, physiotherapists, nutritionists, psychologists, transporters. There are so many people who are involved in success, and it's important that we recognise them all. And it's no wonder, with so many individuals and businesses involved with just one horse, that equestrianism in all its forms is one of the mainstays of our rural economy. As the second largest rural employer, equestrianism is also important to our economic growth, something close to this government's heart. And I hope we're going to see an enthusiastic boost to this following our Olympic successes. And of course, international elite sport is just one of many aspects of the equine industry. My department covers a wide range of matters linked to equine health, welfare, conservation, public health, and national biosecurity. And these also involve a diverse variety of equines. I'm talking about breeding stock, racing and competition animals, those in the leisure centre, and our populations of wild and semi-wild ponies. So what I'd like to do now is update you on my department's work in some of these policy areas. In the time since becoming a Defra Minister, I'm delighted to have met with key industry stakeholders within the British Horse Council. I'm grateful in particular to David Mountford and Roly Owers for their insight to matters that are of most importance to the equine sector. It's really invaluable as a minister to listen firsthand, to hear about the challenges faced by industry, the opportunities that are there, and the areas in which they think government can most support and help. And I do recognise that a key concern in the industry is the improvement of equine identification and traceability. So I'd like to assure you that the government recognises the importance of equine identification and traceability to equine health and to welfare, but also to public health, biosecurity and trade. The government wants to see a robust and streamlined system put in place in order to digitise equine identification. And we are at one with the industry on that particular front. But we have had to pause work in this area, even though we recognise that it is critical, while we tackle the very real challenges that we're facing currently around public finances. My officials are continuing to engage with the British Horse Council to explore ways that equine ID and traceability can be improved within the resourcing constraints that we are facing at present. We had a very positive meeting with them, at which the creation of an industry Defra co-design project was agreed to look at how we can explore moving forward in this area. So I'm really pleased that we have got a good working relationship, that this is a good example where industry and government can work together on a very important issue. And while it's clearly too early to say what the outcomes of this are going to be, I'm looking forward to see how this progresses and will be very much supporting that progress. I'd now like to turn to the ban on the export of live equines for fattening or slaughter. The government, as I'm sure you're aware, is taking action to ensure that live exports the ban on it is enforced as robustly as we can. And through the Animal Welfare Live Exports Enforcement Regulations that came into place last year, we've put in place a regulatory and enforcement regime. And this will provide the Animal and Plant Health Agency and local authorities with the powers that they need in order to act against any non-compliance. Defra has asked industry to consider what additional controls might be required to ensure that equines are not exported for slaughter. I'm delighted that David Mountford is chairing this co-design group. And I'm also very grateful to him and other members of this group for giving up their time and supporting us in moving this forward. Also, they are providing really important expertise on what is such a critical issue to get right. As you all know, equine movements can be complex and varied in nature. And this approach ensures that stakeholders who know their industry best and can provide real insight into key issues can put forward recommendations for evidence-based and pragmatic solutions. This is, to me, is a really good example of how government and industry can work together constructively in order to find the right way forward. So thank you once again for inviting me. I'm very much looking forward to receiving this group's final report in the coming weeks to see how we can continue to move in the direction that industry wants to see us. So thank you again, and I look forward to your questions on the panel.
Minister, thank you very much. And we will take, obviously, live questions from the audience. And also, please do, if you would prefer, whether here or online, to put them on Slido. We've got a couple of questions there already. So I'm now delighted to move on to our second speaker, who you've heard from already, Dr. Richard Newton, Director of Epidemiology and Disease Surveillance at the Equine Infectious Disease Surveillance Unit at the University of Cambridge. And under that theme of protecting our horses' health, what we can all do better, Rich is going to talk to us about how we can all support strategic and practical biosecurity and disease surveillance in the UK. Something you might not know about Richard is the fact that he went to the Queen Elizabeth Grammar School in Wakefield, where our president's son-in-law also went. Richard was a very keen rugby player, but not quite as good as Mike Tyndall. Richard.
Thank you very much, Roly, and thank you very much to the organisers for the kind invitation to address you today. I'm going to get off my chest several things that I've been dying to do for a while now. I think we need to consider that protecting the nation's equine health is definitely a team effort, and we've heard that already today. And most of us here or watching, we are in that team, and therefore we all need to do our bit. If we think about the horse, obviously there are owners, there are keepers, there are veterinary surgeons advising them. We've talked about the industry bodies, and I'm afraid the government as well come under this as well. So I'm going to break this down into sort of 4 levels, and there's a message, I think, for all of those. In terms of owners and keepers, I think and vets, the message is about working together to understand and mitigate risks. In terms of the industry bodies, you set the tone, you set the standards, and I think we do need your support in order to really keep endemic disease surveillance going. We're already hearing what those threats are, and you'll hear a little bit more in a moment. And as for government, they are really important. They deal with the exotic disease outbreaks that we fear the most, and they protect our national equine interests, and I think they play a vital role in protecting all of us at certain times. So thinking about the owners and keepers and equine vets, I've lumped these together because I think they have to work together really closely in order to deliver what we want. And those 2 groups are together on the disease front line. They are the people that are going to be seeing, diagnosing, and reacting to those outbreaks of disease. So they identify, they diagnose, they control, and ultimately they will prevent infectious disease. My first plea is about anonymous reporting. That is the cornerstone of surveillance, and I really would encourage vets and their clients, when you have disease, let us know about it. We'll report it anonymously, and everybody will benefit from that raised awareness. So to vets, my colleagues, don't be afraid to have that conversation. You may be busy around disease control, biosecurity. The livestock industry do this really well. I think we've got some catching up to do. And owners and keepers, again, I would urge you to take the initiative. Risk assess your own situation. They're all unique, but they will all have very similar threats and therefore mitigations. And do that perhaps before you speak to your vet, so that you're hopefully getting the best and quickest advice that you can. So how easy is it to assess that disease risk? Well, I had occasion to think back. This was launched by a group of independent vets called Excel Vets. I think they're still going, but obviously the corporate world has now made inroads into that. This came out in 2013. We worked with them very closely. In the middle of this 20-page, very intense pamphlet, there is a yard risk assessment tool. On paper, you go through it, and each of those different risks, there are various different questions. They're weighted according to the score, and when you get to the end, you add that all up, and you have this red, amber, green risk assessment telling you what your risk is in terms of biosecurity and infectious disease. So actually we had occasion to revisit this with a vet student project. The concept was, could we look at this again? Could we develop a biosecurity risk assessment tool for the modern age for horse owners and to be able to talk to their vets? So we posed this to 2 veterinary students at Cambridge who came to us on EMS placement. They were only with us for 2 weeks, and that was in the summer of last year. And it was really interesting to see how these 2 very intelligent ladies worked. They had a brainstorming session. They put this all down on the good old whiteboard. Not very technical, but it worked. They researched existing resources that were out there, and they went on to create an app using software that was available to them. And indeed, they had opportunity since then to showcase this to some industry representatives and got a very positive feedback. So they did create this simple, user-friendly prototype application, giving a risk score at the end of it, and also some associated advisories that went along with that score. I can't demonstrate that to you now, but it was really exciting to see 2 students grapple this problem in quite a quick way. And it was clearly a good idea. This came out promoted by the Equine Disease Communication Centre in the US, and this came out in only a few weeks ago in February of this year, and it's produced by the University of Guelph, and it's essentially a personalised biosecurity risk calculator that's online. It tackles 10 different areas there, and at the end of that, each of those 10 areas, you get a score. Again, along that red, amber, green type approach, the traffic light system tells you where you're good, where you're bad, what you might be tackling. And I think this is something that vets and horse owners and keepers can work with and understand their biosecurity risks. So moving on to the industry bodies. as I've said, they set the tone, they set the standard, and as you can see here, the HBLB International Codes of Practice, the advice notes produced by the British Equestrian Federation Equine Infectious Disease Advisory Group, and they are really important for combating equine infectious disease risks across industries. The BHA equine influenza rules that have been with us from when the Jockey Club first introduced these in 1981. They set the standards across multiple disciplines since then. We as a group, small group based in Cambridge, we provide important surveillance outputs based on what we hear not only in this country but around the world, and we've recently done this redworm surveillance, Red Watch, to try and give the industry what they want, how much clinical disease is being reported from vets out in practice. We support vets, we support industry bodies when they're required, and you'll remember back in 2021, Valencia, major EHV outbreak, we had to get horses back to GB safely, and we worked with the industry in doing that. So our surveillance and disease response activities are currently reliant on funding from the thoroughbred industry. That is the sole support that we get, and therefore I do think that it is time, probably, if we're going to improve the scope and the sustainability of what we do in terms of protecting the equine industry in terms of infectious disease, that we do broaden the contributions that we receive from different parts of the equine industry. So not just the thoroughbreds. And this was noted back in equine influenza when we had major outbreak in 2019, we must all do more. And then the AHT went down in 2020. The President made a passionate plea about trying to save the AHT that year, I remember it well, and yet we haven't realised anything in terms of benefit coming from the wider industry bodies. And finally, I'm going to move on to government. So great to see the Minister here, and a predictable theme, I guess, and maybe David will touch on it as well. But exotic and emerging notifiable diseases are an ongoing risk in the equine industry. And we have legislation to deal with the majority of these, and they're listed there, and there's quite a few of them, and we're always on our toes against them, depending where they're occurring in the world. So diagnosis and control is therefore covered by this legislation, and Defra and APHA oversee the management of these outbreaks. I think Defra and APHA, they do a fantastic job. They're under a lot of pressure at the moment with avian influenza. Blue tongue virus probably hasn't completely gone away. But have they got everything that they need in order to do the best job possible? And that was a rhetorical question, and I believe no, they don't have everything that they need. And that is because, and a clue is just about to pop up, we come back to the operation of equine ID and traceability. And this was an output from a consultation that was conducted back in 2022, and I'll just highlight here. The timescales talked about then was that this was going to all come through in the summer of 23. A lot has happened since then, and there are obviously good reasons, or maybe not such good reasons, why we haven't achieved that yet. So my urging is, and it's not just me, the industry, the British Horse Council have done this. They've done their own consultation with their members. David, chair of the British Horse Council, has reiterated that accurate data is required to enhance disease surveillance and improve disease outbreak control. And in this survey, 90% of the stakeholders, over 3,000 I believe, that responded, believed that this was required in order to enable disease outbreaks to be most easily controlled. So horses can be highly mobile, second only to humans in transport around the globe. Unfortunately, what that means is they can spread their diseases very quickly and very far. And this is evidenced by equine influenza, which was an exotic alien disease to Australia back in 2007. It got in, broke out of their quarantine station, and wreaked havoc for a number of months. So effective disease control does require prompt and accurate identification of affected and also at-risk animals. So that's the tracing of animals promptly that may be at risk from disease. This is obviously supported when we have rapid mobilised sampling and diagnostic testing, and we've had to use this on occasions ourselves. So the UK urgently needs an updated digital equine ID and traceability regulations. And again, the urging is that we get this done to put us in the best position should we get these emerging diseases, vector-borne diseases, blue tongue, African horse sickness, West Nile virus, if they're going to come in, and we need to deal with those. And also, it's already been highlighted, cross-species transmission risk. It is there, it is a risk. We believe it's low for the horse at the moment, but we have to be aware of it. And we've seen it in dairy cattle, as I already mentioned. So some take-home messages. Owners, keepers, equine vets, work together, assess and manage those disease risks. Industry bodies, keep setting the tone and the standards. You're doing a good job. But also, please, come together, contribute some of your hard-acquired dosh to improving and extending UK endemic disease surveillance. And final message again, and I'm sure the Minister's ears will be ringing by the end of this session, but we do need to deliver those equine ID and traceability regulations. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Richard, thank you very much. And just a reminder, please do, there's a number of questions on Slido. If you like some of the questions there, then please upvote them. We're trying to get to the most popular ones at the very least. And now I'm delighted to move on to our final speaker in this session, is David Mountford, Chair of the British Horse Council. David's going to talk to us about red tape, money and the law, difficult horses to back. I imagine Elon Musk would know which one to back. But David will present an update on the work of the British Horse Council. Something you might not know about David is that when he was stationed in Cyprus, he represented Cyprus in an international polo match against the other polo bigwig, Denmark. He didn't tell me who won. David.
Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Roly, thank you very much. Roly never gets an introduction, does he? But I was at university with Roly, so if you want to know some stories, I know many. See me at lunchtime. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the last 12 months and some of the challenges that we've faced. And I think for all of us, the last year has been interesting, to say the least. For the general equestrian world and the wider world, we've had incredible lows, perhaps around the Charlotte Dujardin incident. We've had some great highs around the medal haul from Paris, which was amazing and brilliant. And now we've got the roller coaster that is dealing with our cousins over the pond. But I want to focus in on the challenges that we've faced with the British Horse Council, covering issues of red tape, money and the law over the last year. So I thought an analogy would be good. If you take a young horse that is ready to back, there are certain things that you don't want to do. You don't want to give it too much instruction. You don't want to give it too much interference. You don't want to force it to be doing things faster than it should be doing. You don't want to spend too little time on it. There needs to be a slow, gradual education process which is specific to that animal. If you don't do these things right, you end up with a limitation on the potential for that horse. And it's the same with legislation. You can have a great idea of what would be good legislation, but if you fail to commit the resources to that legislation to make it work, to bring it to fruition, and if you smother the whole thing in red tape, then you take what could have been great legislation and benefited everyone and turn it into poor legislation. So on the red tape side of things, the situation around the importation of fresh semen from the EU has been an area where we've seen red tape at its best. So since Brexit, we've had to categorise commodities coming into this country. Semen and live horses are considered to be high-risk commodities because of the biosecurity risk. But does that bear a closer look? So if we look at the horses coming into this country, particularly stallions, then relatively there are very low levels of testing, very low controls over horses entering this country, which effectively means I can bring a stallion into this country, not test it for certain venereal diseases, and I can go and breed that stallion with any horse I like. The only thing that's stopping me doing that is my own moral code and some industry guidelines. It's perfectly legal to do. Semen, on the other hand, has always been tightly controlled. We've been importing fresh semen from the EU for about 30 years now, and there is not a single incident of that fresh semen bringing in contagious venereal disease into the equine population. That part of the reason for that is that those stallions are tested before, during and after the season, and the paperwork and the health certificates have always accompanied the semen shipments through to the end point of implantation. So we add on top of that background, sorry, I forgot to mention, with stallions, we have seen regular incursions of venereal diseases into this country as a result of stallions, untested stallions entering and then breeding. So the new system post-Brexit is that we have to have these controls in place. And that is perhaps quite sensible. But for live horses, which are big, difficult to examine, difficult to access, expensive to unload, look at, and to check all the paperwork for, we haven't done that, frankly, because it's too costly and too difficult. So those stallions with a high risk can continue to come in. Semen, however, comes in a box. It's easy to check. You can do a documentary check on it. You can do, this is additional documentary check. You can do an additional identity check, and you can do a physical inspection. So that's classic good. Let's get the law involved and let's wrap that up. We've worked with civil servants on trying to get a good answer, but it was stymied right at the 11th hour. So for this season, currently, we're expecting owners and vets to be able to apply different import rules depending on which airport the semen happens to have come in from. So that's the first thing you've got to get over. That creates a degree of complexity. You get further complexity because depending on which airport they've come into, you need to check different paperwork. So you have, in addition to increased costs for those checks, which can be in some instances, depending on the location of the airport, very high, you will certainly have increased complexity in bringing semen in. And that increased complexity will result in an increased level of failure, not because of the biosecurity risk, but because people get paperwork wrong from time to time. And you will get, it will become more likely that the semen is non-viable by the time it reaches your mare, because it's had to go through all these checks. So where's the benefit? Well, is it biosecurity benefit? I don't think so. I can't see any reason why those checks that we've put in place are going to make the risk lower than it was previously and has been for the last 30 years. Is it going to benefit industry? No, it's going to penalise industry because it's going to add cost, it's going to add complexity, and it's going to put further pressure on an already struggling business. So, not good news generally, and pleased to see that the CVO has taken this away to look at, and we hope we can get some changes in place before the season kicks in properly. Red tape hasn't been the issue with equine ID and traceability. It's been money that's caused the problems there. Really pleased to hear the Minister say she's committed to and understands that this is the way forward and that government buys into it and understands that fully. I hope that we can get it over the line because it is the foundation stone for the industry. It is going to enable the industry to grow and to flourish. It benefits the trade, it benefits welfare, it stops fraud. And we've heard from Richard very eloquently about how it provides the opportunity to control infectious disease, particularly in the face of an increased risk. But most importantly, and perhaps not most importantly, but an important aspect is food security. So back in 2013, the then British Horse Council was invited in urgently by the Secretary of State at the time to ask us what could be done to stop the horse meat scandal happening again. And we told the Secretary of State, digital equine ID and traceability, that'll work. He said, yeah, that's a great idea. And then he left. Over the last 12 years, every single minister that we've met with, and we've met with them all, has said, it's a no-brainer. Digital equine traceability, that is the answer. Let's do it. None of them have done it. Last year, it looked as if we were going to hit the mark. Draft legislation had been put together. It was with the lawyers even, before we had a change in government and a spending review, which has put things on pause. Now, great to hear that we're going again, but I hope, Minister, you'll be the one that gets us over the line. To put the cost in context, the Livestock Information Service, which is the service that provides or is designing digital output for the livestock, the meat-producing sector, has earmarked £500 million to achieve their goals. We are probably looking for less than 1%, maybe even less than 0.5% of that to take this forward. Two important points here. One is that we're so much further ahead than the Livestock Information Service. We could be the perfect pilot. The Livestock Information Service, all of agricultural species, could benefit from seeing how we can get on with running the equine system. That's point one. Point two is, livestock. So, agriculture is a big industry. Livestock is a big industry. But let's look at the numbers a little bit in terms of employees. 250,000 employees, 250,000 people employed by the equine industry in the UK. That is the same as if you add up the totals of everyone involved in the sheep industry, everyone involved in the pig industry, the dairy industry, and the beef industry. So we are a big player. We shouldn't be piddling around looking for 0.5% of the total budget. We should be playing for higher stakes. So, final point I want to make here is that there is a risk. Actually, in reality, in 2013, the horse meat scandal didn't appear for no reason. It appeared because, economically, beef prices were high. There was a high demand for beef products. Beef supply was limited, horse meat supply was plentiful, and it was cheap. That situation is recurring now. So the triggers that made the problem happen in 2013 are there now. And is there horse meat in your lasagna? Don't know. Nobody's tested it. But it's a distinct possibility. And then when we look back, the recommendations from everyone involved in 2013 were that we had digital ID and traceability in horse meat. So let's hope that the progress we make preempts and stops us finding horse meat in our next batch of ready prepared food. Not all doom and gloom, however. The Minister's already mentioned the live exports for slaughter and how we might go about implementing that ban, and the formation of a co-design group which has worked brilliantly together, as the Minister has said. Some fantastic civil servants within government have led and coordinated that. The industry has bought in wholeheartedly and has committed a huge amount of time and energy to create some ideas of how we might move forward. The picture isn't complete. We're not going to be able to come up with the perfect solution because there is that boring fundamental piece of the jigsaw which we don't have, which is ID and traceability. But we are working within the constraints that we have and have come up with some things that we think will really help stop the movement of live horses out of this country for slaughter. We have some odd challenges, one of which is the fact that there are movements of horses masquerading as transit movements. And what I mean by that is they are appearing to come from the Republic of Ireland through the UK as the land bridge to France and onward to slaughterhouses. They are appearing to do that. They're not actually doing that in many cases. And the reason that they're doing that is that you have very few, if any, checks on those movements. So I think it's safe to say there are horses leaving British soil to go to slaughterhouses in Europe at the moment. So what we've tried to do to prevent that happening is introduce a system of managing which will take on board those transit, those movements that are masquerading as transit movements. And it's two-part. It's trusted traders and export permits. This may be the first time the Minister is hearing about this because the report is being finalised tomorrow before it comes up to you, Minister. But it effectively means that if you are a legitimate transporter, you can apply for trusted trader status. Once you've got trusted trader status, you can move relatively free of red tape and delay and cost in and out of the country. So sport horses moving to competitions, race horses moving for breeding or competition purposes, and anyone wishing to move their horse with a trusted trader or using a trusted trader as an agent should be able to move out of the country relatively freely because they are making legitimate moves. If you're not travelling via or using a trusted trader as an agent, then you will be required to get an export permit. Those export permits will allow the regulatory bodies to focus in on where the risks are. There's a lot of intelligence gathering that's done, but no ability to stop. So actually, the export permits will give us a reason to stop these dodgy transit movements and a reason to stop any other movements that the authorities think are nasty people doing nasty things. So, 2 bad, 1 good. What have we got next year? Well, really encouraged to hear what the Minister has said, and really pleased, really looking forward to working for your team. Let's hope that I'm not here next year with a new Minister saying another one's promised. So with a fair wind, with a commitment from the authorities to make things happen, and with also a common sense approach that doesn't mean we're smothered in red tape, hopefully next year will bring us some better prospects like these young horses that we have at home. Thank you very much, everybody.
David, thank you very much. Minister Richard, if you'd like to come and join David on stage, that would be great. I'll kick off with the most highly rated question on Slido, and it's one for you, Minister, as you're walking up. It's around the Highway Code recognises that horse riders are the most at risk and likely to be injured in a collision, with 58 horses and 90 killed and 97 injured on the roads last year. What can the government do to ensure that riders and horses are considered together as the vulnerable road user?
I think it's actually a really important question. I mean, someone who's always lived in a rural area, I'm very aware of the problems that can occur on the roads if people don't take proper caution when there are horses and riders. I think this is something for us to discuss with the Department of Transport, because clearly they make rules around what happens regarding safety on roads. I think that certainly I think one of the most important things that we can do is educate drivers, I think, and that's something perhaps we can work with Department of Transport and actually also local authorities, but also encourage people who are riding to wear high-vis, for example. I think that makes a huge difference because you're much more aware. I think when people see high-vis, they automatically slow down. It's just a psychological thing. So I think that's really important. But it's how we can all come together in order to improve understanding amongst drivers as the importance of not going too fast and keeping distance, and also understanding about why sometimes there are 2 horses together. Because I think there are misunderstandings around this as well. So it is an important issue, and one I think we all have to work together on.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience, or shall I stick with Slido? One question here. Yes, quickly say your name, and if you can keep your questions really tight and short.
Doug Smith, RDA, etc. My question is for the panel. I totally applaud the initiative about the ID and traceability. My question is quite simple. How is it going to be enforced and by whom?
David, why don't you kick off with that?
Thank you very much. Great question. And I think we're all aware of databases that have happened in the past and haven't really worked. And it's because industry hasn't enforced them. So I can bring in a horse at the moment from Ireland, nice youngster. I can register it with British eventing or British show jumping. And I can go and compete it. And no one's going to stop me, even though I don't have a valid UK passport, UK identity for that horse. It doesn't need to be on the database. The hope is that with new legislation that enables it to be easy for me when I import that horse to go online, register my ownership, change the location of that horse in a secure fashion, that it then becomes mine. I don't have to send the passport away and spend money. That's the first instance. So it's easy to do. It's easy to comply. The second instance is that I would hope that we would be able to go to British eventing or British show jumping and say, please don't register anyone to compete in this country unless they are on the Central Equine Database. And there's definitely the opportunity to do that easily. And it could be the same for the pony club. You can't register your pony as a pony club pony unless it is on the Central Equine Database. So unless you can prove that you own it. If that's easy and straightforward to achieve, I think the policing will be done by the industry by and large. If I want to sell you a horse, you're not going to sell it unless you can see on the database that I own it, and therefore I'm legally obliged to sell it to you. So it needs to be easy to achieve. If you make it easy, then industry, I hope, will adopt it and make it, and will do the policing for government.
So, David, you've talked about what the sector needs to do. Minister, what about government?
Well, I think, enforcement is always a challenge. This is one of the things that is really difficult when you're drafting legislation, because too much legislation comes in, but then it's never enforced. And it is a particular challenge. So as I continue to do my role in developing the legislation that the government wants to see go forward, it's really important to me, and I've been working very closely with the Attorney General on new legislation, to ensure that penalties and enforcement are then included as part of that, because too often in the past it hasn't been. But I think David's absolutely right. You know, industry has an important role to play, and I think it's really important in this sort of area that government and industry work closely together to develop how enforcement is going to play out when you're looking at new legislation and laws.
Richard?
Yeah, just from my particular point of view, I think there's a great opportunity here, and I echo what David said. We see examples where the industry polices itself. It's not always ideal, but I think this is a real opportunity for event organisers to know who's coming, where they're coming from, where they're going to. We're seeing CED outlined now being used in Canada. Other countries are picking up on this. They're getting ahead. Why should that happen? It was actually invented here. Stuart's here. I'm sure he'd love to talk about it. But actually, it's really important for a wide range of reasons, most above my pay grade in terms of that. But in terms of disease protection, it's really important and can play a vital role. And we saw in Australia, they had to react very quickly. They had no such system, but they did find a way of finding where those horses were. If they'd had CED, they'd have known that within probably hours.
Thank you. There's a question towards there. Brilliant.
Hello, Ian Heaton, Blue Cross. A common theme in both the talks was money, really, and funding some of these things. And as an accountant, I do have some sympathy with the government as it tries to balance its books, even though I think many of us might question the choices made to balance some of those books. But my question is, really, within the equine industry, I sometimes feel we're not very good at working collaboratively to fund and fundraise within ourselves to pay for some of the stuff that's needed doing. And I wonder if the panel feels that we could do more to both work internally to fund some of these pieces that desperately need doing, be it equine identification or disease control, but also perhaps working collaboratively to minimise the cost of doing so.
Collaborating on costs. David?
Completely agree, and I think that's one of the things that it's been a joy being on the board of the British Horse Council, in that we do get all the parts of the industry together and talking, and we all suffer similar issues, we all have the same experiences, and we're all very poor because we're involved in horses. But there is definitely opportunity to collaborate on fundraising, and Richard mentioned the responsibility of the wider industry to support healthcare, and I would just back that up. I think it's a classic example of where everyone assumes racing is rich, and therefore the thoroughbred industry can just write another check. That is just not the case, and the thoroughbred industry, like all of us, are under financial pressures and threats. We all have a responsibility for the health of our horse population, and we should all contribute a small amount. If everyone contributed a tiny amount every time they risked spreading disease by taking a horse to a competition, or taking a horse to a sale, or taking a horse to a pony club rally, 5p, whatever it happens to be, the amount of money that would bring in, and the great work that we could do to continue to lead the world in disease surveillance and control would lead us all into a better place.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I should have said the earlier question was from Alan Hiscox to the British Horse Society. Ministers, a question from Penny Baker. In relation to the ban on live exports, can we be assured that government recognises the issue are deeper than port enforcement alone? Having a more effective equine ID system is vital, as the current system has no enforcement at all. Shouldn't equine ID be made a priority?
I didn't pay them to say that.
Well, I think the important thing for me to say is I completely recognise how important equine traceability is. And one of the things that I take incredibly seriously about my role is that biosecurity and biosecurity risk. It's a huge challenge. It's very difficult to manage. Clearly, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure everyone is aware, resource is a real problem at the moment. So we are having to take incredibly difficult decisions about how we prioritise. So I think what I would say is that this is absolutely not off the table. We have not said we're not going to do it, but we have to find out within the resource constraints how we can achieve it, how we can move forward. And one of the things that we're trying to do as a department, and actually as government as a whole, is looking to see how we can help
plug our resource gap, if you like, support our resources by working with industry and private equity as well. So I'm totally open to suggestion from industry about ways that we can move forward in this, because we do see it as an important thing that we need to deliver.
Brilliant. Question, thank you, Minister, from Mark. You can keep it brief, Mark, because we'll try and get through a couple more questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mark Weston, British Horse Society. The government has recently announced some large funding for rural communities, and this refers to the opportunity for funding footpath programmes. I'm sure this is a government slip in terminology, because surely it'd be better to fund bridleways or multi-user routes so that cyclists and equestrians could benefit from those funding provision as well.
Minister.
Well, I think that's a very, very good point. And as well as being Minister for Animal Welfare, which includes being Minister for the Horse, I'm also the Minister for Access. And I am actually developing with my team an access strategy. And I can absolutely reassure the gentleman that this is access on footpaths and bridleways and others, actually waterways as well. So it's really, and one of the things we've been looking at is how riders and walkers and actually cyclists can all use the same space safely together.
Excellent. Glad the Beaver's got another look in. Any other questions from the floor? No other questions from the floor? If not, I'm going to go. Richard, are we at risk of facing significant infectious disease outbreak in the horse population before progress is made on a digitisation of equine traceability?
Well, after the Minister's responses, I hope not. But I think people need to recognise they're an ever-present threat. We monitor these things over scales of years, and the pattern of disease has changed. Climate change is a real phenomenon, and it's changing the distribution of vectors. It's putting us at different disease risks. So I'm afraid, yes, we are, but hopefully we can get to the end point and come up with some solutions that help us in the event that these things are, do turn into an incursion.
David, anything you want to add?
No.
No, that's the first time for that. So, brilliant. Listen, thank you so much to Richard, to David, and the Minister, especially to you. We really do appreciate having representation from Defra, and the fact that you've been so open and honest today. It's been brilliant, and we really do appreciate you attending.